FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
But we have to begin by getting your definitions down here. You mentioned that we're at war on terror, and it has by now become a commonplace to say terror is a technique of warfare. It is not an enemy. We're not at war on terror per se. We're at war against Islamic radicals or this. But you say, no, and I'm quoting you directly, we are fighting terror, not just terrorists. Explain that distinction. Explain why you insist on what has been so roundly rejected.
I think most people whose views I respect think you can't have a war against terror. It would be like a war against nostalgia or a war against any particular emotion.
Right.
And they also think that terrorism is a technique, and therefore it's always just a means to an end. The key word I would withdraw from that proposition is always. It has typically in the past been a means to an end. But it can also be, for some groups, an end state itself. If what you want to do is to make people too fearful to exercise choice, if they're just absolutely terrified, too terrified to exercise their own political, religious, moral, and social choices, then what you want is a state of terror in both senses of the phrase. You want a state that maintains this terrifying atmosphere, and you want to induce in the individual a constant fear, the presence of fear.
So it is the preeminent duty of the modern state to protect the state of mind of its own citizens.
That may be going a little far. I don't know that we have to make people jolly and
but we do have to
upbeat and optimistic, but you have to protect civilians, and not just your civilians, from that terror that would keep them from doing what they have a lawful right to do.
All right, and you use the term state of consent. State of terror is a state that promulgates a frame of mind which is too frightened to act freely. State of consent.
States of consent, like states of terror, are ancient. They've come in different forms. We might have trouble thinking of the Florentine oligarchy as a state of consent. They were all men, they were all property owners, they were all prominent figures. But they drew on many patterns of kinship and mercantile relations to get consent from the society that they governed, as opposed to a state like, roughly contemporary with that, was Henry VIII's state, which is really a state of terror, although we think of it perhaps in more benign terms. But if you were a Catholic in Henry VIII's state, you were living in a state of terror in both senses of the term.